Art represents in both the field of art therapy and psychoanalysis. And just the way art presents, the way he talks, the way he just integrates so many interesting concepts is fascinating.
You've heard from Bach a history that was more organizational, but I'd like to give you a kind of personal experience of how the term expressive analysis came about, for it bears very much on the topic today, integrating verbal and nonverbal dialogues, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. Because in some respects, when you two people meet, I'm sure you've always had the experience, there was no chemistry. It was flat. Sometimes, for instance, when a particular patient would come down the hall, I would feel tired before I even saw them. And another one coming right after, I would feel alive and perky. And so I recognize that we all bring a certain kind of energy that's indefinable. I'll tell you more about that, but I want to give you a much more graphic understanding of energy and an energy field that goes on between two people. Because as far as I'm concerned, it is not art, it is not dance, it's what happens in the space in between two people and how they exchange energy, how it moves, how it stops, and how we play with energy, which is formless and form, giving an articulation to the experience. But I think this still sounds rather theoretical. So I'm going to ask my wife to do something that usually is not done at professional meetings. She's going to get out her pendant and take it from there, Sandy.
I'm picking up how far the energy of his body at this moment is going.
I'd like to talk to you then about the stance of an expressive therapist in light of what Sandy has described to you. First and foremost, a therapist attempts to be grounded. You can feel the energy going into the earth. Some of you could even experience yourself as a tree with roots going down. When we are shriveled up, when we feel unsafe, we lose our ground and center. Our energy field collapses. And I am defining, therefore, countertransference as the loss of ground and center. And that regaining your ground and center is part of the treatment, a very central part of treatment. The thing is that sometimes we don't know we've lost our ground. We tend to go up in our head, and what I'm really describing is a body-to-body contact. I'm really inviting both parties, the therapist and patient, to get out of your head. And both parties are moving towards being grounded. Now, I'm not going to describe to the patient what it means to be grounded. They're going to pick it up from my body or not. In fact, a good deal of learning is nonverbal, what they will pick up from my body and take it into their own. Sometimes their body is so walled off that it doesn't take in too much from me. And then it becomes a challenge. It's a very nonverbal challenge. How do you kind of create safety and openness so that they will take something from you? Well, we have a number of different interventions. Bob spoke about art therapy, and where art becomes a transitional object where two people meet through art. But what started to separate me from the art therapy movement is that many different kinds of transitional objects can occur. I'm talking about dance. I'm talking about music. Will give you even another one that has nothing to do with the art form. A patient of mine was hungry about belonging. He was an athlete. And we spoke about basketball, because he had played basketball, and how the team would sometimes come together because they were all open to each other, and they would pass to each other without knowing what they were going to do next. And then somehow the momentum would stop. They either became too self-conscious or what have you about winning, and boom, they would lose that sense of oneness, of connecting with one another. I'm talking about, therefore, a sense of oneness where you loosen up your boundaries and yet become focused, and at the same time have another level of consciousness on the side, which is like a filing system of data and facts about the history of a patient, about past clinical problems. All this comes up very quickly, not in any intellectual way, but a quick reflection that becomes a balance and a way of checking out your experience and being open and connected in this very unified way. And you need, therefore, a counterforce so that then you might say, well, what about the people who are searching for something very different? We know, for instance, that many people who are addicted find solace in groups, in AA. Sometimes it has a spiritual quality to it. I believe that it is possible for therapist and patient, where there is an analytic structure, to talk to each other as souls, as we're both empty, and we're not focusing on the here and now, but we're trying to talk about something bigger. Perhaps it's love, that deep acceptance, a feeling of oneness in the entire universe. There is some kind of subtle connection there between that patient and myself on that level. And so we move according to where diagnostically the patient is, how we play with it. Sometimes we struggle, it's hit and miss. We don't know what we're doing half the time, but suddenly something happens. And so I am making a plea. Give up a treatment plan. Stop trying to heal your patients. Just be present and see what happens. Don't you want to help them, I've been told? That gets in my way of trying to be a rescuer, a helpful person. But if I can just be there, that is something that I think a patient can use, that sense of presence. And in that sense of presence, I believe there is a sense of acceptance, and I believe what we call therapeutic love. And that, I believe, in many instances helps, not in all, but the ability to kind of walk in with a patient without an agenda, without an idea what you want to do. This becomes very important. At the same time, remember what I said, that other level of consciousness is there, that is building, and there are some patients, by the way, who are searching for meaning and reflection. And as you help them organize what their life has been about, there's a sense of building. And that sense of building and adding structure to a structure that is already there is what they're craving for. So that different people need different strokes. It is rare that somebody is just one thing. The diagnosis changes as treatment changes. But whether we give much more form, whether we give much more oneness, how we introduce different interventions, all becomes an artistic choice. And so I'm defining expressive analysis and the coming together of my own parents as the coming together of art and therapy, or art and a clinical point of view. In many respects, as growing up, I had to go back and find out that there was an art piece to me that was alive and that wasn't dead. And as I approached art, not what I could do, but that indefinable space, that became my framework that I have developed over the years. And that is the most important tool you have is the therapist. But that doesn't mean that there is not knowledge and there's not a background that acts as a balance. Now, there are different kinds of energy connections that people make. And so I'm going to become different patients. And I would, who's willing to kind of work with me as their patient, as a patient?
Okay. I'm struggling because my partner is very ill, and I think about myself being ill, and it occurs to me that I'm old. Is that no kind of patient?
You do just be you.
Yeah, I'm just me.
And then you have a choice. Do you bring it back, or do you leave it alone? Do you give her space, or do you move in? That's a decision I will have to make,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure how much space you need. All I know is I see your smiling face, and that communicates a lot to me. So I say to myself, you know, as you talk about your partner who is sick, I ask you, how does it feel to tell me this here in this very big group?
It's scary.
Right.
It's
Only,
scary.
only her smile says, I gotta be a good sport. Does anyone want to go through what she went through?
I was feeling that drag. I was,
Now, you were feeling a drag. That means you were carrying something that was very heavy. That's the underlying communication. When you feel heavy and draggy and burdened, like it's very heavy, you've got a diagnosis here. you've got really a whole issue about an internalized object where the person has can't get out from under and feels increasingly pulled in. The first patient, which was more schizoid, that patient was more up around, going around like this. Not like this, the energy, but going around like this. Therefore, what I'm saying is what you are feeling to some degree indicates the diagnosis. I'm also saying avoid too early a closure. Let things hang out before you tie them up together. Yes, you will go from construction to deconstruction, but is it important not to kind of come to or pushing things together, but letting them hang out until they come together on their own? This having a natural gestalt means that you have the courage to wait, not look bright, stay in the unknown, and endure an anxiety of not knowing where you're going. This is a neat trick because most of us want to know where we're going, want to have a direction, and hate not knowing what we're doing. Most therapists I've met have had depressive mothers. That means they like to be helpful because they've learned to make contact with a depressive mother. You're helpful. That's the way you can make contact. It doesn't happen to everybody that way. But what I'm raising here is that if you can endure not knowing and open up the space to see where it goes, you don't have to throw out everything in terms of critical understanding. That has to be your balance in working with energy. And you don't obsess. What you do is reflect very quickly, so you're going back and forth. There is a rhythm. And indeed, when you lose your ground, one way of getting back your ground is by breathing and feeling your body. The problem is it's not always easy to know when you've lost your ground. But if you forget about your patient, or you go too much into explanations or what have you, anything that is long and wound up sounds a little bit too intellectual. The best interventions are rather short before the person builds up a barrier against them.
I mean, how comfortable are you sitting with silences, and what's your experience of that?
I think of a depressed patient who is looking for me to rescue them, to do something. And there's a plea in their face. And I sit and I'm aware of their plea, but say nothing, but feel their plea. Try to kind of work on my wish to be of help, and finally get into a meditative moment. In many respects, it doesn't feel like silence when I'm in a meditative moment with a patient. But when I'm not in my body, the silence seems awful. But when I am making some kind of energy contact, which is not spoken about, the silence can feel very holy. It depends, therefore, I have certainly worked with people who are very quiet, who say very little. One, in fact, said very little with me for 2 years. For 2 years, she would come, lie on the couch, say hardly anything, and leave. I will tell you, I was wondering why I was seeing her, or whether she needed a different therapist, but we endured it. Something happened, and then something happened between us. Out of nowhere, she said to me, after this I'm going for a pizza. And I said, oh, where do you get your pizza? And this started a long dialogue on pizzas. And so I became a specialist of every pizza place in the city. And we would talk about different levels of pizza. And slowly she would talk about other things.
Especially when it comes to energy. And if you could, with what you know now, go back and work through those challenges, how would you do so?
Well, first let me say that the therapist I was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, is not the therapist I am today. Something has happened to me. I've gotten older. Maybe we know, by the way, from brain research, that men tend to get more mellow as they get older. Whatever I've done because I am who I am. I've developed. I'm merely a human being with a history that changes. I don't try to make up for it. I try not to make reparations, but to, as a result, be free of those mistakes. Try not to repeat them and learn from them. But if I start attacking myself for what I didn't do or should have done, that is going to be the enemy. That's what stops the process. Going up to your head and attacking yourself. Yeah. I want to tell you about my work with a stone, because it has a lot to do with being a clinician. First, you got to hold the stone and touch it. You got to feel its contours. You got to make friends with the stone. And then, when you have your hammer and chisel, you're faced with a very big challenge. How to get into the stone without cracking it. If you hit it too hard, you will injure it and crack it. However, if you don't use force and penetrate the stone, you never get into it. So I learned as an important principle that you don't fight the stone, but sometimes to get into it, you got to penetrate. That comes across in some of my work with people, that aggression is not a bad word. It's not hostile. And therapeutic aggression has a place in treatment. And that being able to penetrate also is part of being a therapist. However, when I work as a welder, there, which I love and can't do it anymore because it's too heavy, I remember going with Bob's son to the junkyard. And he and I would collect junk. And,
Metal junk.
Metal junk. And we bring it back, and I put junk into a new form. I found discarded pieces and found a place that gave them life and new meaning. And it came through fire. It came through melting the metal, and finding a shape and putting them, all the pieces with space and form together. And so, in many respects, you don't lose pieces in life. You find new ways of putting them together. That we're all junk sculptors. We're all finding discarded pieces that we never can discard, but we have to find new ways of formulating and putting them together.
Thank you all